guys, Carly's here with the Shadow Box. Thank you for coming in. I am your grief and trauma coach and your shadow work guide. Today I have with us Stephanie Dyck. Stephanie is originally from New Mexico, but she now finds herself in South Dakota. Stephanie is a funeral director, and she has been in the world of funerals since she was 15 years old. And we will definitely get more background on that. Stephanie is a grief coach, and she is also the founder of Lumina's Labyrinth, where she helps those who are suffering with carrying the burden of unseen grief. She helps those to kind of get through that. So, Stephanie, give us a little bit more background on yourself and just how you came into this world of funeral directing and grief, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be in this space with you. And, I often tell people I come from what people think is a very sad world, meaning the funeral and the grief side of things, which absolutely, right? Naturally, we understand their sadness. But then we use funny words in there like happy and excited and looking forward to and all these things. And so I very much am so appreciative to be in a space where we can talk about grief in a way um, that maybe it does shine a different light on that. So thank you for having me here for that. A little about me, yes, like you shared. So I was born and raised in the northern mountains of New Mexico. So absolutely beautiful. And that's still where all of my family is. But a few years ago, my husband and I, so my husband is also a funeral director. And we worked for the state's largest family owned funeral home there for over 15 years. But it came time as a family to just kind of see what else was out there. And so we set off, so just he and I and our two little ones. And we found this place up here in South Dakota. So very family oriented and yeah, so we're making our own way here
Yeah.
and navigating that. Initially, there was grief there, right? We left all that we knew and loved and what was familiar and set out to do something different. And yeah, I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit later. But yes, so like you said, I was introduced to the world of funeral at a very young age. And so I started working at one of our local funeral homes when I was 15. When I was 15, all my other friends were working at like the local burger place, and there I was working at the funeral home and started out on a actually I started out there job shadowing, and over time they offered me a job. So I worked there part time after school, on the weekends, all that fun stuff. And at that time, it was doing little stuff. I was holding the door open for guests as they were coming in to attend services, filing paperwork. Finally, I was able to answer phones. I was able to do some cleaning and all that kind of stuff that you really learn the ins and outs of what really happens behind the scenes at a funeral home. And then from there, I just kind of grew with it and stayed with it. So after high school, of course, college, and then went on to attend mortuary school in Mesa, Arizona.
Okay.
Hmm.
That's a lot
It
of
is.
early starting in the world of funerals, right? And I'm glad that you also led with that, the aspect of understanding that there's different wordings in grief and how to use them. And so most people are thinking, it's supposed to be sad and it's supposed to be, and it is, definitely is. So it's kind of a play off of what I said, all of that good stuff that you're doing,
Yes.
right? Because on the other end of the spectrum from where you're coming from, you are actually servicing, right? So
Absolutely.
you're servicing your customers on the front end, pretty much, and you've also been on the back end as well, as far as embalming and being in the trenches of it. So you are really doing all that's necessary to make sure that their services and that their loved one is taken care of in a good way, and to
Absolutely.
make sure that they're happy.
Yes. Yes. And
Yeah.
that's truly where my heart and my passion is.
Mhm.
Right. So I can remember I was 5 years old when my great grandfather passed away. We
Yeah.
lived just right up the road from him. Um, and I'll never forget that day. I was playing in the living room with my cousin, and my aunt ran in, and I mean, like if she could have knocked down that door, she would have, right? She ran in and said, something's happened to grandpa. And she was talking to my dad, and she said, something's happened to grandpa and I need you to come help. So my dad looks at my cousin and I and says, you both stay right here. And he takes off running. Well, no, we weren't going to stay right there. So
Yeah.
we had no idea what we were running to, other than we were worried about our grandpa. And so we kind of stayed, there was all the men in my family just there. And initially we didn't know why, but we're kind of peeking through the fence and looking in, trying to see what we can. And then I overheard my dad say, let's stop. He's already gone.
Mm.
And I remember my cousin, he was older than I was, like holding me tight and was like, we didn't know what to do. But at that moment, again, we're from a small town, especially, that long ago, the ambulance came. And so in my little 5-year-old mind, he was going to be okay because the ambulance was coming and they took him. And in the past, when the ambulance came, the person came back.
Yeah.
So at some point, right, I don't remember all the details after that, but at some point, my parents had a conversation with me about the fact that he had died. And,
Hmm.
again, they're talking to a 5-year-old, but in my mind, I'm like, what's going on here? And how do we know that he's okay? Where is he? Where is he if he's not coming back? And my mom said, well, he's at the funeral home. And I was like, well, that's whatever. I don't know what that means. But in my little mind, all I thought was, we would see him and spend time with him every single day. And we, meaning my family as a collective unit, we would take care of him. And so then I asked her, well, who's taking care of him? How do we know that he's okay? And from that conversation as a little 5-year-old, that's where everything was kind of sparked for me. That question of who's taking care of him, who's taking care of our loved ones when they die. Like, how do we know that they're good people and that it's a good thing? So as I eventually got into and being able to take care of families in that way, that's initially where, when I started working at a funeral home as like a licensed funeral director and embalmer, I
Yeah.
started working in the care center, which is the embalming room. And I just poured every single part of myself into that, because I knew that at the end of what all of our work was adding up to was a family who was going to be able to spend time with their loved one.
Hmm.
And so I poured into that, and then in time I grew into the role of also meeting with families.
Okay. Yeah. Did you, which did you prefer? Or did you prefer the front end or the back end?
So when I was first, and it was a good thing, right? Like I had my managers come up and say, like, we really noticed something great in you and we would like for you to start meeting with families. Oh my goodness, I was terrified. I was so scared because I thought, I don't know if I'm like a people person, right? I don't know if I can go
Mm.
out there and do that. When people ask, like, how can you do that? Like, isn't it, you see so much and all this? I'm like, you know
Hmm.
what? The dead people are not the scary part. Like, it's
Yeah.
dealing and so it was so different. And at first I was scared and I was nervous. And then over time, I realized I don't have to be anything other than what I am, right? And really, at the end of the day, I am just a human being connecting with other human beings, trying to help them in the best way possible, right? And if
Mm.
what I can do as a funeral director has even the smallest impact on what they're going through in that moment, then that's my role. And I was very, and continue to be, very honored and proud to be able to help families from the front to what's going on behind the scenes and everything in between, right? So
Yeah.
for me, I never stopped doing either one. And there were still days in the middle of that where some days you are answering the phones and you're taking out the trash and you're cleaning the vehicles. And that's what it takes to truly work as a team and make it all happen for the sake of the family on the other end.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about identity a little bit later as we talk. But when you are a teenager and you are going in such a profession, that's to society or to your peers is not a normal thing, right? And
Right.
so people are kind of looking at you like, oh, she's weird. She's different. Why is she? Oh, here comes that funeral girl. How did you navigate that identity and it wasn't an identity crisis, but how did you navigate your identity versus your social world with your peers?
That's such a great question. Well, I was blessed to grow up in the little town that I did. So I'm from the town of Pecos, New Mexico. It's still a beautiful little town. And as a teenager, we would kind of be like, oh, like we're from this small town and everybody knows our business and all this stuff. But the blessing in all of that was I grew up with my graduating class. We had 35 in my graduating class, and we were the same third. Now we had some that came and left and different things in between, but for the most part, we went to preschool together all the way on up through high school. So these were truly like these people grew up with me and they knew who I was. So honestly, in that environment, in like the high school setting, everybody was like, Cole, did you just get off work? Are you coming from the funeral home? So it was
Okay.
very much, and counselors and teachers and my family, they were all so supportive. So going back to what you said about the identity, for me from a very young age, I had become this funeral world person, if that makes sense. So that was very normal. It wasn't until like later when I was going to college and meeting, especially when it would come to like meeting guys, meeting boys, right? It was like,
Yeah.
oh, what do you do? And then when I shared with them, it was like, oh, like that's a little bit crazy, and I don't know if I want to be. And so then that was kind of like my first taste of, oh, you mean people think this is weird? Like this is,
Mm.
and so I was like, okay, I had to, yeah, kind of figure out like who didn't get weirded out or scared off by it, and whoever didn't, those were my people.
Yeah, and coming from a small community, like you said, but also your culture. When we think about the culture that you come from, usually it's very spiritually based.
Yes.
And so when we think about spiritual based cultures, dealing with the dead, dealing with, those who are grieving, there's a whole different perspective, a whole different way of how they deal with death, where it's not a weird thing because
Yes.
as it is in society in general, somebody's got to do it, right? But
Yes.
then when you come from a culture where it's kind of like a sacred society in
Mhm.
your culture, it's looked at differently from those who are around you, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, our like Hispanic heritage, that culture, the New Mexican culture itself is so beautiful. And, holding on to traditions and rituals is such a huge part of that. Everything from, welcoming people into your home to the food that you serve, and all of that plays such a big role in it. And what was interesting, and we'll probably touch on this a little bit later as well, is going from New Mexico to South Dakota. What a big cultural difference. And yeah, that was really eye opening, even in the world of funeral. Even though some things are similar, those cultural differences definitely made a huge impact on me.
Yeah, definitely. So,
Yes.
kind of walk us through your education
Mhm.
of kind of where you started in the funeral world all the way up to kind of where you ended here as being a grief coach.
Absolutely. So after I graduated high school, I was definitely one of those teenagers that was like, oh, I just want to get away. So I moved, my first year of college, I went to school in Alamosa, Colorado, to Adams State College. And honestly, I loved it. It was like the perfect distance away from home. It was like 3 hours away, but far enough to where I was,
Yeah.
felt as if I was on my own. Um, and then I didn't stay right after that first year. I think, I don't know. I don't honestly, looking back, like I was young and, you think, oh, I'll just do this and that. And at that time, I think I had decided, well, the end result is to go to mortuary school, right? And at the time in the state of New Mexico, in order to become a licensed funeral director, you needed to first have an associate's degree and then attend mortuary school. And then after mortuary school, you did a 1 year internship. And then after that, you got your license. So young me decided I was going to go back to New Mexico. And I went to school and graduated there from, goodness, I don't even think it exists anymore, but it was like a technical vocational school, right? And got my associates there, kind of just dabbling in a little bit of everything. So at that time, I took some Spanish classes and business and all these different things that I was just having fun with it, but got the associates and
Yeah.
then went to mortuary school. And that's where I knew I wanted to be, right? So mortuary school for me, it was fun in that that was in Mesa, Arizona, and it was, I mean,
Hmm.
just gorgeous, beautiful place. I got to meet new people, had fun roommates, and all these types of things. But because I was so just like focused, and that's where I wanted to be, I kind of like breezed through that. So I would like midterms or final exams, stuff like that. Like I would take those early and be done early. So I remember like my Christmas break was a lot longer than others because I was basically like, I'm done. Like I'm ready to do this. Um, and so yeah, so after that, moved back and worked, and then just this past year, I lost my grandmother, and that for me, we'll talk about later, but my whole world as I knew it shifted that day. And prior to this, I had been exploring the idea of grief coaching. For me, from the perspective of being a funeral director and building these wonderful relationships with families, and then wondering like what happens, a few months down the road as far as like with grief and what do they do? How do they go home and live this life? Now, the funeral home we came from in Albuquerque had a wonderful aftercare and grief, follow up for families. But once we were up here, it was a little bit different, and it was my kind of personal exploration at that point. How could
Hmm.
I further help these families? And then it wasn't until I lost my grandmother that it really hit me, and I started exploring. So I found this Grief to Purpose program and went through that, and so that's where I'm at now, right? Wrapped up that program. I'm still part of that Grief to Purpose program as a coach and a mentor now, which is amazing. Um, and I'm learning so much there. So, yeah, that's brought me to where I am now.
Yeah, that's it's. I love the way that your journey has just stayed the course.
Mhm.
Like that's one thing of knowing, like this is what I want to do. Knowing your purpose, knowing your passion turned into your purpose, and then as we continue to talk, we're gonna understand how it kind of catapulted you into what you're doing now, and
Yes.
how how it's been following you all the days of your life of this is who I'm supposed to be, right? But when we come into that aspect of so close to home and you losing your grandmother, and that's where we're going to start talking about a little bit of that identity, because when grandma passed away, that hit you like a ton of bricks.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and go into grandma. And what's grandma's name?
Her name is Dolores, my grandma
Dolores.
Dolores Senna. Um, yeah, so, part of what I so strongly believe in now is like owning your story, the good,
Yeah.
the bad, everything in between, owning your grief, right? Because as a society, that's something that we push away. And owning your feelings, right? And for me, a big one is the tears. I didn't used to cry at the drop of a hat, and now I do, right? And especially right when I talk about my grandma, it's still so new, and anyone who has lost someone and goes through this grief, it sometimes the word is just weird. It's just
Yeah.
weird how you feel sometimes. Um, because it's weird that she's not here. It's weird that I can't call her. But for many people, when I share with them, like I'm devastated after the loss of my grandmother, some of the first questions I get are, well, was she sick? How old was she? And the first few times you're kind of like, okay, well, I guess I'll answer them. But after a few, I'm like, those two questions have nothing to do with who she was and the impact that she
Yeah.
had on my life, right? So those are the first two, like, that were eye opening. And I kind of joked, but I was like, the next person to ask me how old my grandma was, I might say like she was 532, and it
Yeah.
still was not enough, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the age or what, if they were sick or anything like that. They're still your person, right? For me, my parents divorced when I was young, and that was a very hard divorce for my sisters and I. And my grandma stepped into that mother role. My sisters and I stayed with my dad for the most part. He raised the three of us with my grandma right there. And then my mom was very much still part of our lives and still
Mhm.
is, but it was just a different relationship. So people that don't know that background might off the bat think like it's a grandma, but she was more than that. When you talk about the layers of grief and the layers of relationships and the layers of love, it's so much deeper than that.
Mhm.
I was the firstborn granddaughter, all those things, and so my identity was that as well, right?
Mhm.
So when my grandma died, yes, I'm still a granddaughter, but man, my grandma was she was so proud, and she was so I knew that no matter what I was going through on this earth, even if I wasn't right in front of her, wherever she was like cheering me. She was there.
Yeah.
She was, and then so I'm in South Dakota, there in New Mexico for a little while just to survive after she passed. Carlise, I really chose some days to be in denial.
Yeah.
And I would wake up and be like, you know what? Today I need to get some stuff done. And I can recognize that later in the day I'm going to sit and I'm going to cry, or I'm going to whatever I'm going to feel at that point.
Mhm.
But in order just to make it through today, just the next few hours, in my mind she's sitting in her chair at home. And and that would get me through the to the day, and then I would have to sit with those feelings at night, right? And
Yeah.
sitting with those feelings and working that through, and that identity piece coming up again with like, well, if I'm not that, what am I? Who am I? How do I go forward with that? And I think that was honestly a stronger push to really discover my purpose, right? Like
Yeah.
if I'm not that, then who am I? But who do I want to choose to be? Like what am
Yeah.
I really trying to fulfill here? So that's really what sparked from there.
Yeah, and that's why I say that, when you do lose that person that is really close, it catapults you into that exposure of that, who am I really on the inside? Who am I at my authentic core? Who am I now that this entity, spirit, energy, vibration is gone, that has always kind of risen up in me or kind of shown me how to navigate myself in this world. Now, what do I do? Right? And am I, now that I'm doing this alone or by myself and she's not tangibly here, how do I continue to carry on now that I'm not having this side of the world, this side of life's energy push? Right? And so when we think about that, how did what did you learn about yourself as you were starting to understand that grandma's not here? And I ask that because grandma took the place of mom. Yes, mom was still there, um, but grandma was mom in a sense, right? And so it's like you're still you're still a young lady, right? It's not like you're a teenager. It's not like you're in your 20s. It's not like you're a fresh new mom, but you're still going to go through levels of life where you're going to have to gain some understanding of the leveling up that you're doing, the changes that you're experiencing, right? And
Yeah.
so with grandma being so close to you as that mother figure in a sense, how does that affect you? Do you think about that? Does that also affect your thought process on identity and how to navigate?
Absolutely. And I think, a huge part of that is navigating those secondary losses,
Mm.
right? So losing her like that day, it's like that day that rocked my world, right? But then it's all these other losses. Like now just getting through Mother's Day weekend.
Mhm.
Like that, and Mother's Day itself, I was fine. Those days leading up to it, it was like, when I'm like, I never really thought about how much I enjoyed, and I thought about, the plant I was going to buy because she absolutely loved flowers and beautiful plants in her home, or the card or anything like that, right? And all of those kind of shift your identity because I'm not feeling that role anymore, and I don't have to fill it, and gosh, I miss it. I
Yeah.
really do miss it, right? The whole shift in dynamics of our entire family. We don't know who we are. We're all trying to navigate, and it's loss of identity on the familial level. Like it's a bigger thing than just myself. And I have
Mhm.
to sit back and I have to recognize that. You know,
Yeah.
another thing that I truly felt, and I've always been this way, just to kind of live and let things like show, right? But now with my grief, I also have to recognize that I'm very comfortable with my grief, and I'm very comfortable in showing it and letting the tears fall and talking about
Mhm.
her, and sometimes even push myself to feel those big feelings. And I have to respect the fact that even within my own family, people are going to grieve differently.
Yeah.
People don't always want to hear what I have to say just because it's what helps me in that moment. And so that's been a huge learning process. Um, and yeah, and I think that's part of life, right? Is navigating those. Sometimes it feels like a really sharp corner when you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't comfortable and I don't know what to do here. And kind of
Mhm.
just like the release of breath afterwards to say like, okay, we made it through that. We learned how to navigate that corner. So maybe we're not going to visit it in that same way next time.
Yeah. Yeah, and not even visit it that same way next time, but at least you'll know what triggers you, right? Because those triggers come up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when those triggers do come up, or those days are starting to come up, or, even people's diets change
Yeah.
when anniversaries or death dates start coming up. And so it's like, okay, recognizing that. And it's like, okay, so since this is happening, I'm going to allow myself to feel my feelings. I'm going to allow myself to be in this space, and I'm going to let it take me through my ebbs and flows, but I know that I'm going to come out on the other end where it's still functional,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so we touched on culture in the beginning, and let's talk about culture again in the aspect of how we deal with death, and how some cultures deal with it within the family. Because, like you said, it could be different, for
Yeah.
each person. So tell me the other end of the spectrum of that.
You know, I think one of the other blessings as far as being a funeral director, especially where I was in Albuquerque, we got to see and work and experience so many different cultures and traditions and rituals, and it was absolutely beautiful, right? And for me, people used to ask me like, oh well, do you go to church? And I used to, it was like a joke, like, well, sometimes I'm Baptist in the morning and I'm Catholic in the afternoon or whatever, because we were doing so many different things, right? But within that was kind of sitting back sometimes and just letting the wow factor hit you, of like,
Yeah.
wow, like as a culture, as a community, as a whatever it may be, we're as funeral service professionals, like we are gifted
Mhm.
this opportunity to be part of these rituals and these traditions. And especially in New Mexico, like our traditions run deep, right? And there's so many beautiful things there. So I think culturally, and obviously I can't speak to all, right? But like the Hispanic, like those roots run deep in like connection and celebrating in that way. The flip side to that is maybe they don't deal so much with like talking about,
Yeah.
right? And then that's also a cultural thing. But I think just as generally as a society, we don't talk about the stuff that's ugly or that doesn't feel so good. We don't do that out in the open. It's something that goes unseen, that goes hidden.
Yeah. Definitely, and which is why you have this unseen word in your title, and in your grief work, because there is a lot that's unseen, that people experience when they are grieving, because we don't know who we can run to. We don't know who wants to hear the story. We want to go to people without feeling like they have to manage us, or them feeling like they have to manage us, or that we're needing managing. You sometimes you just don't know, and so you go into your whole cocoon, especially when you do come from a family or from a culture where it's not talked about. And there's a big stigma when it comes to, Hispanic cultures and even African American cultures, where talking about things that are mental health wise, death, because it does some emotional things to you, it does some psychological things to you. It's more so a pat on the back, you'll be okay.
Mhm.
Let's do X, Y, and Z. A pat on the back,
Yes.
let me cook you some food. It's like no one knows how to really deal with it. So
And
no
there's
one knows how to navigate. Go
and
ahead.
I would add to that, there's some sense of like odd pride that's associated with that. Like I'm
Hmm.
proud to put up this front that I'm strong and I'm carrying this big heavy burden. And I think, man, if we could only put down that pride a little bit and peel
Yeah.
back just little by little what's going on there, like think of what that would do for not only ourselves but our children and their children going forward,
Yeah.
right? So that's really where I'm approaching it, because I'm like, I think it's time. It's time.
Yeah. Definitely time, and it's safe. You
Yes.
know, when you have people like yourself, when you have people like me, when we have this community of grief, a grief community, it's like you can find someone who looks like you, someone who thinks like you, someone who has the same spirituality as you, or what have you, that can help you to navigate through your emotions and just your place in where you're grieving. And so
Yes.
it's not a cookie cutter thing, but a lot of people suffer alone when they don't have to.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely.
Okay, so now that we talk about some things that are unseen,
Mhm.
and we're going to go into really the backdrop of your profession
Mhm.
because it's intense.
Yeah.
You know, it's very intense. And I know, as we talked about psychological things that happen when people are grieving, but when you're behind the scenes and you're seeing others grieve, or you're behind the scenes seeing the actuality of death itself, what sort of psychological impact does it take on you?
Well, that's such a huge question. And, this morning I went for a walk and I was thinking about that question in particular. And I thought, when I first started out, full time at the funeral home, I was in my early 20s when you think you're invincible and things just bounce off of you. And, people would ask me, like, how could you do that? Or doesn't it get to you? And I was like, no, like, I'm not taking care of my own people. So it's a little bit different. And I think maybe for a little while, like that, I maybe that's where it was, that's what my reality was. But then things changed, right? I think for me, it was, meeting my husband and getting into that new relationship and having children, and all of a sudden there's different aspects, and I wasn't just married to my career anymore, right? And that for me was really when things started shifting, and I recognized I don't want to take some of this home, right? I want to take home maybe what's good about it, but all of this energy, if you will, like it wasn't mine to carry home each night.
Yeah.
And as you touched on, so often we see just the worst of what can happen, right, to people. And from we see, it's sometimes I would say, like, if I could meet with a family who lost their loved one who was 100 years old, like I would I would do that all day, as opposed to, helping someone who had this child death or some kind of traumatic something like that. Um, and now I can acknowledge, like, no matter where you are on the spectrum of those types of losses, it doesn't matter. Like, you lost your person and you're hurting. But there were some things that were just so heavy, right? And so what I learned to do for myself was, I'm a human being. So I would try to walk through the doors of the funeral home and leave all of what didn't belong there at the door. And then
Yeah.
tell myself, like, I'll pick this up again on my way out. Like, it'll be here waiting for me, all
Yeah.
whatever it was going on. But then what I also had to do was, at the end of the day, when I walked out of the funeral home, was leave what needed to be left there. And so, I would do little kind of my own little rituals to kind of mentally, emotionally, spiritually kind of cleanse myself, if you will,
Mhm.
um, before I went home. And it was, simple things from like sitting in my car for 15 minutes before going in, and just kind of, whether it was listening to music or closing my eyes and just being there and breathing and letting it out. And sometimes, like, have a little talk about, okay, this is what you saw and experienced and helped with today. And you can recognize, what your role was in all of that. But that's not your role as you walk in this front door of your home,
Mhm.
right? I would do little things like, and I still do that to this day. If there's, no matter what, I'm thinking, if it's not mine to carry, it's not mine to carry. So whether it's good energy or bad energy, right? Especially
Yeah.
from the funeral home, I do this, like I literally dust myself off from head to toe, and I kind of shake and like do some breaths where I'm like pushing it out because it's not mine to carry and to hold on to.
Yeah.
I need to
Yeah.
be present as a wife, as a mom, and learning to be present for myself, especially. That's probably been the biggest or the most difficult piece to work on, but I needed to recognize that good or bad, it wasn't mine to take home.
Yeah. What aspects of the job um, was most difficult of letting go, and that you really had to release? Was it the way someone passed away? Was it just the aspect of just constantly doing this job, the task every day? What is it that really got to you that was really making an impact?
I would say it was those like the heavy ones, right? And goodness, like there's some that pop out right away, but those really traumatic ones, especially like a child, and kind of seeing family dynamics and just different things going on, those are probably the ones, especially after I had my own children, that just sat so heavy in me, right?
Yeah.
And my husband is also a funeral director. We met and literally fell in love. Like our whole relationship was built at the funeral home. That's all we know. And having him to, I could come home and say, like, wow, like my mama heart is just hurting because of all of this that I did today. And those are probably the heaviest ones. And then there were things of like, when you're just pouring all of yourself into something, and you're just taking care of a million and five details, and one itty bitty little thing doesn't go as planned,
Yeah.
then it was like the self-doubt, the blame, the shame, all of the things would just be so heavy. Those are probably some of the biggest holes that I had to crawl myself out of.
Yeah. Would you say that it would be beneficial for funeral directors or anyone who works in the funeral industry to seek therapy or to have consistent support as they're doing their job?
I think that's a huge thing, right? Absolutely. And I think I look back to my time, right? And I think like, wow, even if I maybe had like a mindfulness
Hmm.
exercise, like, so maybe something like a mindfulness coach, or honestly, like a grief coach, right? Like it's such a like a fine line you walk, right? Of living in both worlds. Like I'm a human being and I have my own social life and things and roles that I play, but then I'm also a funeral director or an embalmer or some way another funeral service professional, and I'm expected to take on the busyness, the heaviness, just all of these things that go with it, all the while like maybe someone whom I love died, or maybe someone I love left, or maybe someone I love is missing, or maybe they're struggling with drugs and alcohol. There's so many things, right? And so
Right.
even if it could be at the end of the day, at the end of the week, coming together, whether it's individually or as a team, to sit down and reflect on like, whoa, like this is what I've been through this week. This is what we collectively as a team have been through. Like, where are we? Let's check in with each other. I
Yeah.
think, that's something I would love to carry forward. And as I grow my business, so at the same time that I decided to do this, my husband also decided to start a business. So his is a funeral consulting company, and there's a lot happening with that. But part of that is training, and what I would love to build in there is a program for funeral service professionals that kind of speaks to exactly what we're doing here, because it's heavy, or it can be, right? It can be, and I think it takes leadership in funeral homes, especially, to recognize that and take care of their staff, all the from all the things that could happen.
Yeah. And, when we think about that, it's funerals, not the funeral, but the funeral task, the things that go on behind the scenes, it makes everything so real. it makes, and sometimes, yeah, you can keep it to the back of your mind because you're passionate about whatever it is that you're doing. But again, when it hits home, close like it did for you and like it does for a lot of people, it's that whole stoic thing that a lot of, funeral staff, funeral directors have,
Mhm.
it crumbles it.
Absolutely.
And so with that being said, you can only be so stoic. You can only think of this as a customer or as a body or as, how they say, their spirit is gone, but this is just a shell of their body. Yeah, tell that to someone who also has a funeral they have to plan for their family member, right? That they're clinging on to.
Mhm.
So I think that you going into it, your husband going into the consulting, I think that that's going to really open up a different spectrum
Mhm.
for those who are in the funeral services to say, maybe my people aren't okay all the time when they're walking in here or when they're walking out of here.
Yeah.
How do I ease their burden of death?
Yeah.
Death is heavy. Um, so awesome. I love that. I love it. So, and now we're really seeing how your past experiences and everything that you come through as a child, as seeing your grandfather, and then being a teenage funeral director, intern, all of that. Here we are, and it just propels you into your purpose. And then you have a husband that is like right there with you,
Yeah. Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So, with that being said, how did you find yourself grieving your grandmother as you were being a funeral director?
Mhm.
Like, how did you navigate that? And how did husband, since he is behind the scenes as well, how did he come in and help you, or was he even able to in that process?
That's such a great question. So, again, my grandmother was in New Mexico, right? And when it happened this particular week, we were actually in Colorado. So my grandmother that passed is my dad's mom, so that's my dad's side of the family. But we were in Colorado with my mom and my mom's side of the family. Um, so my husband went for a few days. He had to leave early. That was all planned, right? And so the plan in it was after our time in Colorado, I was going to go down to New Mexico to take care of my grandmother because she was having surgery. Um, and so I was planning on being there, and it was the kids and I were going to be there for 3 weeks to go and take care of her. And I was looking forward to it. She was excited. It was all the things. And so my husband drove back up from Colorado, and the next day, um, my sisters and I, as we sat together, it was the first time that entire week that it was just the three of us in this
Mhm.
quiet space. And that's when we got the phone call. And so here I was in a different state, right? Um, and even though I was with family and my sisters, especially, thank goodness the three of us were together, I was struggling to navigate this, right? Immediately, I'm like, okay, I'm not right there. So, I mean, I was blessed to have all of these amazing friends who are all still funeral service professionals. And I called on them immediately to help me care for my grandma, and called my husband who's back in South Dakota and told him. And I'm like, I need you to come down to New Mexico as soon as you can. And, of course, there's work and there's families here who need him here and all of these things. And so I had wonderful friends that jumped in and helped me in every way that they could in New Mexico. And after all was said and done, we sat back and looked at it, and there were 5 different funeral homes that were played a role just because they were our friends who, for so long were part of our lives, and everyone wanted to help. And I jumped into that role of funeral director, right? And like did all that I could, but I also had to recognize that there were parts of it that were just a little too much for me, right?
Yeah.
And even up until 15 minutes before our viewing and visitation was going to start, because I wanted to do everything and take care of getting her dressed and her hair, and she never wore any makeup. And what do you do when you have to put some sort of makeup on somebody? And I struggled with that. And so one of my dearest friends came to help me. And at a certain point, she just got my hands and she kind of brought them together and she said, I need you to just take a moment away. And I'm like, no, like I have to see this through. And
Yeah.
she said, I'm going to help you and I'm here to help you, but I can't do that with you right here. And I think you need to step away for a moment.
Yeah.
And that was the best. And then, oh my goodness, like she did exactly what I needed her to do. And she was there for me in that moment. And so were so many other friends that just, I can't say enough about how they stepped in to help. Right. And in the background, behind the scenes, I'm calling my husband saying, like, now we need to talk about getting a burial vault and we need to talk about whatever it is. And I don't want to make those phone calls. So he's here in South Dakota talking to this group of friends at various funeral homes, all just everything from the flowers to everything. You know, it was definitely a huge group effort. And my family was just, I think, in awe of how many people were lined up ready to help and just, putting this all together for my grandma. So yeah, it was beautiful in gosh, beautiful in a time when it's hard to find the beauty in it. Everything
Yeah.
was beautiful for her. So yeah, there was a lot that happened behind the scenes to make that happen.
Yeah. And just being able to kind of relinquish that control, especially when you are the professional in this, like you're like, I want X, Y, and Z. I know what sort of makeup she needs to use. I know, all of the details behind. And I can only imagine that that was hard for you to relinquish that. But there was a lot of it that you didn't have to, but
Yes.
there was some of it that you knew that you couldn't handle,
Yes.
and that's that capacity, understanding capacity. And
Yes.
that was huge for you. And so as we kind of go through that, you've moved to South Dakota, you've lost grandma, you're like, okay, I've been in this world for a long time, and now I'm having these identity shifts. I'm having these location changes, all of this stuff. So after experiencing all of that, where would you say that it lands you now today? Has it changed you? Has it changed your thought processing on how you're showing up in the funeral directing world? Where are you at now?
Absolutely. Well, we moved up here a few years ago, and that initial shift. So when we moved up here, um, I didn't go back to work full time. So I'm part time at the funeral home. My husband is there full time. Um, and when we did it for all the right reasons, right? I had some health stuff I was still trying to recover from, and we just needed to focus on us as a family, right? But that shift from that, just my everyday busyness and those that role that I filled, right? Shifting from that into this role of primarily a stay-at-home mom and navigating this part, that identity loss was huge for me. And I really struggled my first year up here of like, who am I don't have my people, I don't have my career, I don't have all of these things. And then started just exploring different areas of like, who am I now? Then losing my grandma was just like, well, if I thought I was struggling with identity loss before, like, who am I now that she's not in the world, right? And it really sent me down this path. But then I just sat and thought, like, okay, who am I now? Well, I'll tell you who I am no longer.
Yeah.
And I am no longer the person who seeks validation from others.
Mm-hmm.
I am no longer the people pleaser that I was before.
Yeah.
And I really am I'm happy to let those go, right? Because now what I've discovered is this feeling of like empowerment and almost like a liberating feeling of I don't have all of that stuff holding me back anymore.
Yeah.
And really, like, the meaning of life is to live it,
Right.
right? And now, do I have my hard days? Do I have the days when I self-doubt the heck out of myself or
Mm-hmm.
comparison sets in and all that? Absolutely. But in part of owning my story and my grief and my owning my purpose is making that choice to get up and dust myself off and go forward for the simple sake of helping others. At the end of the day, my purpose maybe looks a little bit different now, but I'm still serving others through a difficult time.
Yeah, and it shifts. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as your life shifts, your purpose, it stays the same, but it shifts with you. It grows with you. And so you may enter into a different spectrum of it or into a different area of it, but it still represents what you are put on this earth to do, right?
Yes.
It still represents the servicing. And because you can't, as you get older and older and older, and we continue to get older and older, it's like, yeah, I can't run a marathon anymore now that I'm 80
Yeah.
years old, or now that I'm 60 years old. Some can, but hey, I know I wouldn't be able to,
Right.
right? Or should I not limit myself?
Right.
But let's say that part. But, you know, as you have to have an open mind and you have to have enough focus in order to say, as I grow, I want this to grow with me,
Yeah.
right? So we know that this is a part of me. We know that this profession that I have gone in is a part of my servicing that I'm supposed to do. So how do I make this work so that I can navigate it and I can allow it to navigate me to keep going through the trajectory of my life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that for you, coming from the beginning all the way until now, again, it's just been a perfect road for you, so to speak. There goes one of those words. You
Mhm.
know, a perfect
Yeah.
road for
Mhm.
you to that has just kind of led you to
Yeah.
here, and you're comfortable with it. And every time that we go into a shift or go into some sort of identity change, yeah, it's painful, especially
Mhm.
depending on the way that we get in there, right?
Yeah.
And then how we have to shift and go through it,
Mhm.
that's another painful part. But we know that the purpose and the plan and the passion is there on the other end as we get through to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think now, whereas before maybe I saw things as like, oh, that's just what I do. Now
Hmm.
it's truly able to recognize like these are the gifts that God gave me, and they
Yeah.
are truly gifts. And I need to put them to work, right? I need to
Yeah.
do that. So, and then that part of it is exciting for me, right? That's
Yeah.
another, you talk about that, like it's exciting to think about helping someone heal, and heal is one of those words that's like, you think healing and you think like, oh, it's, you're done. No,
Yeah.
right? But it's a learning process. It's growing. But that part is where it's fulfilling for me.
Yeah. So I know that you said you know who you're not, but
Hmm.
I'm going to ask you
Hmm.
now that you've come here and you are in this space, tell me who are you, Stephanie?
Hmm. I think I am now daring, right? Having the audacity to be authentically me, not pretending. And for me, it's being real. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a Christian woman who loves Jesus and loves talking about things that make other people feel uncomfortable for the simple sake of bringing out emotions, shedding some tears, and like just being real,
Yeah.
right? I am someone who I don't live on like the superficial level whatsoever. So if you and I are in the elevator and it's like, oh, lovely day, how's the weather? I will be the most awkward person you've ever met with the small talk, right? But in that
Yeah.
elevator ride, you and I might get down deep into like what happened to us 30 years ago and we've
Yeah.
connected. Like that's just who I am and where I am in this space. And I'm a seeker, I'm a connector, and I just want to enjoy what is meant to be enjoyed, or you know what, sit with what doesn't feel so good and work through that as well.
Yeah. I love it. A seeker and a connector. I love it. I love it. What can we look forward to seeing from you here in the near future?
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier, so my business is Lumina's Labyrinth, which even that is just really, what does that mean? It's an exploration into yourself, right? Like you are Lumina, you are this bright light, but we might have to navigate this funky labyrinth to figure out who you are, right? Which is everything you just brought out in me in this discussion. But right now, I've been doing one-on-one virtual coaching, which I absolutely love, and I will go forward doing that. And then, like I mentioned, I really want to build a program for funeral directors. It's such a special and unique group of people. And so going forward, I hope to build that training or coaching, whatever that looks like. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm excited for that. And then I think just like yourself, like this space of podcasting is such a beautiful gift. And the thought that someone can listen to this while they're like pushing their baby and going for a walk in a stroller, like how beautiful is that, right? So yeah, I think those are some of what's coming, and actually excited for what else maybe I don't even know that's on its way. So
Yeah, yeah, and being open to it, right? Letting it guide you, and staying again within your purpose, but allowing life to kind of guide you once you get into your authentic part of yourself. It's a whole lot easier than it's ever been. You know,
absolutely.
it will be a whole lot easier than it's ever been because you're not going against the grain,
Yes.
right? You're
Hmm.
like, you're going with the flow, even when the flow is a little rocky sometimes. Like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna drown or if I'm gonna make it through, but you're going
Yes.
with the flow, right?
Yep.
And so I think that's beautiful. And every part of Stephanie's information or contact information and how to get in touch with her grief coaching, I will post that at the bottom of her bio in the podcast as well. So, Stephanie, thank you so very much
Thank you.
for coming into the shadow box and just opening yourself up and spending time with us and just going deeper than the surface and just bringing us into your world and just kind of giving us a glimpse of what it looks like, what it feels like, and even where it's taking you. And I just appreciate your presence and being here with us.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you and your time, and yes, thank you for every part of this conversation today.
Yeah. Everyone else, thank you for coming into the shadow box and spending time with us. And we will see you next time. Namaste.